Hello, it's Randi Rhodes. Here's a clip from our show, and go to randyrhodes.com for the whole thing and a podcast. Buy a stinking podcast.
Mary had a little man.
The fault. We believe that all men are created equal.
To the magnificent mosaic that is America.
From radio beacon to radio beacon. I have a dream. Change has come to America.
Knock, knock. Who's there?
It's a figment of your imagination.
Randi Rhodes Show. Turn up
I think
your
the president
mind.
is assembling a war cabinet. To take a war to Bob Mueller, he's got Joe DeGeneva. To take a trade war to China, he's got Larry Kudlow. And now to actually have a real war, he's got John Bolton. And the only question is, will we find ourselves in a military conflict vis-a-vis North Korea or Iran or both? Because John Bolton's rhetoric has been very clear. He believes the Iran deal should be torn up, that we should engage in military action in the Middle East. And his view, as you illuminated from that op-ed in the Wall Street Journal, is that we have the legal authority and the military necessity of launching preemptive military strike against the North Korean regime.
Fernando Monti back, filling in for the goddess. Hey, everybody. Happy Friday, huh?
It's Friday, you bastard.
For those of you that grew up in South Florida like I did, a little homage to the original god of radio, Neil Rogers. Neil God. But what a way to wake up to Friday with the news yesterday. It actually happened right as we were getting off the air yesterday. John Bolton. You know, it's amazing. I gotta tell you, the capacity for this administration just to take the worst possible scenario and then make it even compound the awfulness. It almost makes you want Michael Flynn back as the national security advisor. Moscow Misha, huh? He'd almost look a little bit better compared to John Bolton. People are saying, well, what's so bad about John Bolton? I think it's what Richard Painter said. Richard Painter, former general counsel in the Bush White House, said, there is no doubt in my mind the absolute most horrifying figure that we had in the administration, the most dangerous figure, was John Bolton. But I'll tell you, everybody, it really didn't get me scared until I heard what our next guest said about this man. Like I said, I came ready to play. Scotty Mendick, you know me. I don't come unprepared. I wanted to make sure I went out with a bang since Randi was kind enough to give me the mic chair for a couple of days here. But I wanted to get the very best mind in America for my money to explain to you why John Bolton is a holy moly kind of moment and what it really means and why, without kidding, folks, in addition to some of the stuff we're going to talk about later with Bob Mueller, why we all need to pay extra special attention and why this administration is now on war footing and why you just heard Jeremy Bash, former CIA advisor, chief of staff, tell us that Trump is now building a wartime cabinet. Our next guest is going to tell you just how bad it is. If you've got a television set and you've tuned it on to MSNBC anytime over the last 2 years, you have seen this man who speaks with tremendous gravitas. He was the first person to tell us that the Russians hacked us. It is the author of the plot to hack America, and the former Navy man himself, Malcolm Nance. We welcome him to the program. Hey, Malcolm.
Yeah, it's my pleasure to be here.
Malcolm, tell all of the listeners across the fruited plain tuning in now what you think of John Bolton and why it's worse than we could have possibly thought.
Well, John Bolton is a person who, during his time in the Bush administration, could not be confirmed by a Republican Congress in any position whatsoever. As a matter of fact, he has a hate club in the Republican caucus because he was an obnoxious individual. He was a toxic leader. The only positions he could get were the ones where he was appointed. And he is the quintessential example of a warmonger. I spent my entire life as an intelligence warfighter. I've been involved in every combat operation since Beirut in 1983. And John Bolton is the kind of person who likes war on a large scale. Best part about it, he served in the Maryland National Guard. And during the Vietnam War, he said there's no reason for him to have to go fight over in those rice paddies. So All
So
of
like
these
Dick
guys-
Cheney, he's a chicken hawk, in other words.
I was just going to say they are all chicken hawks.
Yeah, totally.
So they all want war without understanding the consequences. He believes in the use of strategic military power to change the way of the world. He was a huge advocate of the invasion of Iraq. And he believes that war, we should be at war and carry out regime change in both Iran, 80 million people, and North Korea, an atomic, a nuclear power now. So this could spell bad things for American foreign policy. Donald Trump, of course, he likes chaos. He thrives on it. It excites him. And getting this cabinet now, getting rid of adults, General Kelly and General Mattis, I'm sure, will eventually be the last ones that will be the next ones out. And he will get a group of people that will give him his fantasies that, why he wants the military parade, because he wants to use the military.
So, Malcolm, when Malcolm Nance speaks, it's kind of like the old E.F. Hutton had ads. People listen, right? And you said something. You spoke on Twitter yesterday, and you literally wrote something that chilled me to the bones. And, folks, if you are on Twitter, do me a favor. Go right this instant and follow Malcolm Nance. You can follow him at Malcolm Nance. But, Malcolm, what you wrote there was something I'm going to share with the audience. And I want you to tell me, was tongue somewhat in cheek? Was it firmly in cheek? Or were you stone cold serious like Malcolm Nanstradamus, as I've called you, unfortunately, because you've been too right on the money predicting events months and weeks and sometimes years before they happen? Here's what you wrote on Twitter. You wrote, "Prepare for a war with Iran. Iran will have a bomb in a year. Mark my words."
No, there was no tongue in cheek at all in that. I'm not an expert in Iran, but I have fought Iran 4 times. And I can tell you there's very few people in the armed forces who have had that happen. I mean, I was in Beirut when they attacked the American embassy and the Marine barracks with a Vivat, that's right, Iranian intelligence design bomb. I was in 2 naval clashes with Iran, one of which we sank ships and shot down their aircraft. My ship did that alone. I've been in an Iranian minefield where they had secretly planted sea mines all throughout the Persian Gulf. And I had been in Iraq when we were attacked with Iranian-made rockets by an Iranian-backed militia from, a Shia group we thought were allies. So Iran has had, and now that started in that little career path right there was 1983 all the way up to present time. And that tells you the length of Iran's strategy of making themselves a power throughout the region. They know what they're doing. However, when we fought in Iraq, when we made that mistake of invading Iraq, Iraq was 25 million people. We fought the Sunni community, which was just 5 million people. They had 80,000 combatants, terrorist combatants, that killed 4,500 American soldiers. That's just, we were fighting 15% of the population. Iran is 80 million people with a 1 million man commando force. Okay? That's not the regular army. That's just the Pasdaran, the Iranian Revolutionary Guard, their special forces. And we will fight every one of those people in a unified nation that will bring it to us.
Malcolm, what was it that was said about Afghanistan? It's where empires go to die, or the people.
Go to die.
Sure. I'm feeling the same kind of reaction as you described the situation with Iran. I think you're right on the money as always. So, Malcolm, here's the question. These guys are obviously moving in this direction. It feels very much like what we saw in the run-up to the Iraq War in the 2003 period. The American public then was unable to stop what ended up being the greatest foreign policy disaster in American history. Do you have any feeling, Malcolm? Is there any reason for optimism, or better yet, counsel, advice from your perspective? What should the American people be doing today that do not want this country to get on a war footing with Iran?
I literally just wrote that in the last chapter of a new book that's coming out. You have power. Every individual who's listening to this show has equal power when it comes to the power of the vote and it comes to the power of their voice. I mean, you recall in the run-up to the Iraq War, which I was not a supporter of. I mean, before we even invaded, it was very clear to me, I'd spent my entire career in the Middle East, that there was no case there. I mean, even the Iraqis were confused as to what weapons of mass destruction Bush was talking about, right? When they were hunting around their own stockpiles. We have to stand up and make it clear, whether that means going out and marching and telephoning your congressmen, men and women, emailing, getting together with these indivisible groups. You have to show power. You guys remember the Tea Party? The Tea Party went out with their little Gadsden flags, and one or two dozen of them would get onto television because they were a unified organization. Well, we need to unify for the defense of America. We need to unify and show that we believe in the core values, not these crazy values that Donald Trump and John Bolton bring to the table.
But Malcolm, this is such an important point. And yesterday I was subbing in for Randy, and I devoted the entire show, Malcolm, to asking a single question. This, of course, before the news came across the wire that John Bolton was picked as the NSA advisor. But the question yesterday, which I thought was the most important question in America today for a true patriot that loves this country, which was, what is your plan of action if Robert Mueller is fired? How does that dovetail with what you're saying? Because, yes, it does sound like physical, peaceful protest, but, you've got so many issues, so many things happening at once. How do you suggest the American people think about even getting organized logistically to do what you're saying needs to be done?
Well, when you and I talked about a year ago, and I kept asking, where's our billionaires? Where are our Mercers? Where are, the people who just throw reams of money behind all of these ultra-crazy conservative ideas that allow them to take over government? Well, what we need individuals at the $5 and $10 level, or the individual motivation level, to get out whenever there is an opportunity to raise your voice. I mean, if there's this whole group of women that used to march down in Argentina whose children were kidnapped and murdered by the government, the Desaparecidos, these ladies, and they would just silently march every freaking day in a circle until the entire world understood what they were doing. This needs to become organized at the grassroots level, at the indivisible level, at the street level, to where you go out and create it. You feel antagonized? Have a protest every day or every Friday or whatever, and make it shown in the local media that you have a voice. Otherwise, your voice is lost. I mean, you're being washed over by Russian intelligence and Fox News.
Malcolm, before I let you go, I do want you to weigh in specifically about that question of yesterday, and I want you to use our remaining seconds here to tell the American people, you're a military man, you're used to operating on a quickness with logistical precision. If the word comes out, and all signs are it's going to happen, if Robert Mueller is fired, tell these people what you think they need to do within hours, minutes of the news coming across the wire.
Well, I mean, it's not... I don't even think it's an hours thing. I mean, we all have the right, according to us in the First Amendment, to have redress, the right to exercise our freedom of speech and freedom of assembly. Men died for this right? Like Washington says, freedom is a light for which many men have died in darkness. And that, by the way, is written over a cemetery of 1,000 Revolutionary War soldiers in Philadelphia. You have an obligation to fulfill that right. You have an obligation to ensure that if this is your line, if this line is being crossed by a newfound tyrant, as Benjamin Franklin predicted would rise in this country one day, then you need to have a minute-to-minute action plan. Figure out where you're going. You're going to a federal building. You're going to go to City Hall. This stuff is already being discussed out there. Finalize those changes and make that your birthright to be able to exercise your right to redress and right to protest.
Malcolm, I haven't had a chance to say this in a long time, but I know I speak on behalf of much of the Randi Rhodes Air Force and millions of Americans around the country when I say thank you, Malcolm. Thank you for always speaking truth for power. I know you're going to do it again all throughout this weekend and in the days and weeks to come. Malcolm Nance, everybody.
Take care.
All right. Folks, we will be back with more. We're going to have if we can top Malcolm Nance, I think we've got the guy to do it. Scotty's looking at me and saying, oh, yeah, how'd you manage this one? Well, I told you I wasn't going to come empty, not on a Friday at least. I had big shoes to fill with Randi Rhodes. So am I going to have someone as good as Malcolm Nance?
Absolutely correct, sir.
I think that is the case. But, folks, just get ready. You switch the dial down from MSNBC to CNN. Malcolm Nance may be the best commentator on MSNBC. For my money, we've got the best commentator on CNN up next. I'll tell you who it is on the other side, but when we come back, don't forget to do the Amandi Credo always.
Wake up!
Get smart.
Just follow the money.
Clear for takeoff.
Randi Rhodes Air Force. Air Force. RandiRhodes.com.
Mitchell Gold and Bob Williams introduces its Spring 2018 home collection of classic, modern, and new traditional silhouettes in a vivid spectrum of colors, textures, patterns, and prints. The new spring collection features a modern slant with clean-lined and comfortable styles that pay tribute to iconic American designs from the mid-century to the late 1970s. Experience the new collection in comfort at a signature store near you, or peruse the entire collection in e-catalog online. Find a store and shop online at mgbwhome.com. Join the Mitchell Gold and Bob Williams Comfort Club, a customer loyalty program that offers you 20% savings every day with exclusive access to special member-only offers and services like complimentary in-home design. It's free. It's easy to join. Sign up now. Start saving today at a Mitchell Gold and Bob Williams signature store near you or online at mgbwhome.com.
Hello, I'm Casey Hobbs.
And I'm Shane Mason, and we're the hosts of Nurse Talk Radio.
Here's what we're talking about this week. Earlier this month, in a nearly unanimous vote, Kaiser RNs and NPs in California voted to authorize the California Nurses Association bargaining team to call a strike if needed to achieve a fair contract that provides safe staffing and demonstrates respect for nurses' contributions to Kaiser.
With 99% voting yes to authorize a strike, RNs and NPs have sent Kaiser a clear message that there's overwhelming support for the CNA bargaining team's demands and that nurses are ready to strike if needed to make sure patients get safe care.
Last year, Kaiser made $3.8 billion in profits.
No strike date has been set, but should the CNA bargaining team decide to move forward with the strike, they'll provide Kaiser and the public 10 days advance notice so that Kaiser can make appropriate preparations, including postponing elective procedures and making the necessary patient transfers.
We just heard that there has been a tentative agreement, and here with us to talk about it is RN and co-president of National Nurses United, Deborah Berger. Deborah, welcome to Nurse Talk. It's always a pleasure to have you with us.
Good morning. It's really exciting news. Actually, good afternoon.
Yeah,
Yes.
Congratulations. This is great. So we want to hear about the contract. We also want to hear how to address some of the needs that NNU had made known. So first off, how does this contract improve patient care?
Well, we got several staffing enhancements that address nurses' concerns about their ability to provide safe care to their patients. We've won 150 full-time equivalents of campus support nurse positions. 106 of them are going to be posted within the first 90 days after ratification. And so that will allow nurses to deal with emerging situations that do require extra staff, but often we don't have enough available immediately. So that was key. And then Kaiser's going from an acuity system where the nurses have already in the contract a number of protections for making sure that the system is transparent.
You got an additional 600 patient care coordinators positions.
Those are really exciting. These nurses have been unrepresented by a union for decades, and they felt that it was extremely important to have the protections of the union so they could speak up on behalf of their patients. And so now they will have the benefit of a union and will be able to better advocate for improved patient care.
Thanks for listening. You can find more information about these topics at nursetalksite.com or nationalnursesunited.org.
This podcast is powered by National Nurses United, the nation's largest union for registered nurses.
remember as a kid, the stereotypical things associated with girls were cooking, cleaning, fashion, interior design, anything to do with children, hair, makeup. But as an adult, I realize that the top earners in all of these professions are men. How did this happen? Well, it's one of the conversations we're going to have on my new show called She Persisted. I'm your host, Melissa Carter, and as a media personality, a lesbian, a single mom, and a patient with a chronic disease, I can tell you, I certainly have some opinions, and I know that you do too. So let's be part of each other's lives and talk these things out on She Persisted. It's at 8 a.m. on the East on the Progressive Voices Network and on demand on the Progressive Voices app. I would really love for you to be part of the show because I believe that together we can go from She Persisted to She Thrived. I hope you'll join me.
All things Randi at RandiRhodes.com.
Go for launch.
Speaking truth to power, the Randi Rhodes Show.
This is how the phone call went, and yet there is concern.
There is. I don't think he ignored the advice. Let me make it even simpler. Let me couple this with the conversation he had about trade with the Canadian Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, where it's clear that the president didn't have a knowledge of what the trade relationship was with the Canadians because he told us he made it up. I served in the National Security Council. When you have a meeting or a phone call with between the President of the United States and a foreign official, the president gets background, for example, about Canadian trade or about what happened during the Russian elections, including ballot box stuffing, and he gets what we call talking points. That is, this is what we suggest you say. Based on those two experiences, the Canadian Prime Minister and the fact that he didn't appear to know what the package was, what the materials were provided by his staff, I don't think he reads any of this stuff. I mean, as a National Security Council staffer, you want to bang your head against the wall. It's not that hard. You get half a page of stuff that says, tell the Russian president, you won, but it was a little bit of an ugly election. Tell him you don't like him meddling in the elections, and then tell him, hey, our closest ally is UK. We stand with them as they investigate Russian potential or attempted murder of a former spy on UK soil. He didn't read any of this stuff, just as he didn't read it when he was talking to Justin Trudeau.
Fernando Monti back, subbing in for Randi Rhodes. Folks, if you can't get enough of yours truly when the goddess comes back from her little Austin vacay, you can always check me out on the Strange Days podcast, a little podcast we do every Thursday. Go to www.strangedayspodcast.com. And I'm pleased to welcome one of our favorite guests on the podcast, certainly one of our most popular. Whenever he comes on, the reaction is overwhelming. And we just went from what, for my money, is the best voice on MSNBC, Malcolm Nance, to the best voice and contributor on CNN. I'm proud to call him a friend also. He is Felipe Fongo, as we call him in Miami, or as he's known, across the fruited plain, the former deputy director of the CIA and also Robert Mueller's right hand at the FBI Security Center for 4 years, Phil Mudd. Hey, Phil.
Do not ever compare me to an MSNBC contributor, please, okay?
Phil, I want to get into the whole do not congratulate fiasco, just the latest fiasco. Every time we talk, Phil, it's just like it tops the outrage, tops the outrage. But before we get into anything else, I'm groping for your feelings, your reaction on what I just talked about with Malcolm, the naming of John Bolton as the new NSA advisor.
There's two elements that I would think about if you're looking at this. The first is if you're the president of the United States, you want differing views. In the case of President Trump, you want views that maybe that might be more tempered than he is. He brought in generals, I think, to say we got a guy from New York, a real estate investor. We've got to have people who have experience in overseas operations, including military engagements since 9/11, to say, you might have views from New York, but there's a different perspective from serving in the battlefield. That perspective is starting to disappear. You lost General Flynn. You lost General McMaster. Sidelined in some ways, according to press reports, the chief of staff, who's a four-star general, General Kelly. So you bring in somebody who's seen as bombastic, who's seen as interventionist, aggressive in terms of intervention in North Korea and Iran, and what do you get? I'm afraid you're going to get people who are confirming some of the president's worst impulses when he serves as president of the United States. So I guess I just worry that you won't get just different perspectives in the Oval Office, and the president's impulses will be supported by his new staff.
You know, Philip, if you were sitting back at your desk in Langley and you were doing what you did best over there, you were a specialist when it came to understanding South Asia and the Middle East. You know, Malcolm thinks we are on war footing now for a conflict in Iran. If you're back at your desk and you're seeing the moves made domestically here by the President of the United States, is that the conclusion you're quickly coming to, seeing what's now happening and the personnel changes that are taking place within this White House?
It depends on whether I'm in the office or at home. At home, I would be sitting there saying, my money's got to be on the Secretary of Defense. He's a four-star who comes in initially with the former Secretary of State, or soon-to-be former Secretary of State, the head of ExxonMobil, Reason Voice, H.R. McMaster, who served in the field. These people are going to sort of rein in the President of the United States. You're sitting there hoping the Secretary of Defense is kind of the last defense against the impulses of President Trump will sit there and say, okay, there's a different perspective on intervention in the world. Don't bomb first because there's always second-order consequences. I think when you're home having a beer, you're saying, I hope the Secretary of Defense keeps the president reined. When you're at work, I got to tell you, Fernand, this story is much simpler. The people of the United States elected a president. Whether you're at State Department, CIA, FBI, your job is to support the people, the president that the people elected. And it's tough, but I hope I would sit there saying what the president wants, we'll try to support it unless it's illegal or unethical. We'll try to support it. Last thing, quickly, the Congress's role will become more critical. They're going to become more critical in questioning the decisions of the president and determining whether they put a brake on the president's action.
Philip, you know, we've seen presidents past on certainly the Republican side, even on the Democratic side, engage in conflicts around the world without necessarily having congressional approval. Do you see any kind of activity that the president can unilaterally take without a compliant Congress, without a Congress that gives him those war powers, which according to the Constitution is how it's supposed to work? But do you see the president being able to engage militarily, whether it be in Iran or North Korea or any other hotspot around the globe, without having buy-in by the Congress?
Yes. We've already seen that. Remember when we had chemical weapon strikes by the Syrian leader Bashar al-Assad, the president from Mar-a-Lago authorized, and then boasted the Chinese premier, authorized missile strikes against locations in Syria. The president can authorize military strikes, even something simpler. He can authorize military training exercise that the North Koreans might view as very aggressive without going to the Congress. If I were the Congress, that'd be something I'd think about. How do you maintain oversight of the president when he can authorize operations that the Congress can't really control? That's pain. It's a painful moment in America.
Oh, you can say that again. Philip, I want to go back to the earlier outrage incident of the week. I mean, again, the problem with this administration is that it happens every single day, and it's almost as it's governing by chaos, by design. The more off balance we are, the more norms and outrage that happen every day, the harder it is to keep focus on a moving target. But I want to go back to the comments we opened the segment with, which was, of course, the call with Vladimir Putin. When it came to the Russian situation,
got Russia.
That's right. The president had Russia there, and apparently, according to the leaked reports in the Washington Post, it couldn't have been any clearer. His advisors at the time said, Mr. President, there is questions about the integrity of the election in Russia, especially the message it would send to the world. Do not congratulate this man. He did it anyway. And I've asked you this in the past, Philip, and I'm going to ask you again. Is this not the signs of a president that, for better or for worse, is under the spell of this man, if not a witting or unwitting asset of Vladimir Putin?
You know, I can't figure this out. If you'd asked me 14 months ago, I would say President Trump is making a reasoned decision, the same decision George Bush and President Obama made. That is, I need to see if I can get on some common ground with the Russian president. What's happened in the interim, though, is we have clear evidence of intervention in the American election. We have the Russian cooperation with the Syrian leadership that's been involved in chemical weapons strikes against its own people. Why can't we walk and chew gum at the same time? When the president makes that phone call, He doesn't have to say congratulations on the election. He can say, I understand you won a new term. We've got some issues we need to work on in places like Syria, and I have questions about what you're doing in American elections and why you tried to murder a Russian, former Russian spy in the UK. Why? The White House said we don't have the right to tell other people how to run their elections. I got that. That's not the question for Sarah Sanders. The question is, when the President of the United States picked up the phone, why can't he say, you won the election, and I also have questions about some of your other activities? Why is that so hard?
It's the question of the day. I mean, when it comes to this man, and again, point after point, Philip Mudd, and you even saw it at the beginning of last week, where you had the then Secretary of State, Rex Tillerson, make the comments, and we've seen in hindsight, break with the White House. The only American official, I think, was out there condemning that action in Russia. He's fired the next day.
Yeah.
Then we see the National Security Advisor now, H.R. McMaster, speak very vociferously against some of those activities of Russia, seemingly also talking about the hacking that the Russians have done in the nuclear power grid and some of the other utilities. He's out on his ear the day after. It seems that any time any member of the government working for this president or this administration says anything that is either anti-Putin or anti-Russia, they're met with their walking papers. And it really has a chilling effect for me personally. I know many people around the country. Philip, I also got to get your take. You are one of the few men in America, and I don't know if you've been on these airwaves before, but I know we've talked about this elsewhere, and I want the audience to hear. You've actually worked side by side. What's that?
I'm great. Go ahead.
You've worked side by side with the man that all of America is pinning its hopes on to save the republic. It is, of course, Special Counsel Robert Mueller. You worked with him in the FBI for 4.5 years. You've told me that he is every bit the legend and the mythical things we heard about, and then some. What does Robert Mueller's investigation mean now, and does he react to any of this noise taking place around him?
The only thing I can think that he would react to would be whether or not the president moves to take out the attorney general, or whether the attorney general resigns. The attorney general obviously has recused himself from the Russia investigation. That means the deputy attorney general, Rod Rosenstein, is in charge. If the president of the United States selects a new attorney general who says, I now oversee the Russia investigation, I now oversee Robert Mueller, and I'm an ally of the president, what then happens? I mean, I have some thoughts on what might happen, but short of that, people watch all this turmoil, and I think they probably assume it has an impact on the Robert Mueller I knew for 4.5 years as the director of the FBI. I don't think it does. I think he looks at this and says, that's nice for the Washington Post and for radio, but I'm here investigating facts. I'll take the investigation wherever the facts go, and New York Times, the Washington Post, have a good time. That's not my problem.
Philip, the other question that I know you don't have insight to, but you certainly have a perspective having worked so closely with Bob Mueller for so many years. Is he the type of man that strikes you as having a plan B? In other words, yes, he has to know that the speculation is rife that he could be fired at any moment. Has he been developing, along with the investigation in parallel, a plan B for what will happen and what he will implement if he is indeed fired and it's orchestrated by the President of the United States?
That's a great question. I'm going to give you an answer, and let me make sure I get this right. The answer is yes. Do not interpret that to mean, though, that he is trying to game Washington. The guy is an American patriot. He's a decorated U.S. Marine. I never saw him do anything political. What I'm saying is he's going to run the investigation in whatever direction the facts take him. He's not stupid. He's looking, saying, there's a chance that there will be sort of a sidetrack here. What do I do in that event? I don't think it will be political. I don't think it will be anti-Trump. I think it'll be, look, the investigation wasn't able to conclude because of a political act. What's the appropriate next step for the American people? The guy was he's the best I ever saw. I never saw him make a political statement. In 4.5 years, that's probably 2,000 meetings. So, yes, but he has a plan, I guarantee, but I don't think the plan would be sort of a revenge plan against President Trump. It's just, we're told to conduct an investigation. How do I continue the investigation?
Philip, one of the other individuals that you work with very closely during your time at the FBI and certainly had a chance to interact and engage with was James Comey. And he sent an ominous tweet to President Trump the other day, basically saying, look, Mr. President, the American people have heard your perspective. Pretty soon, I'm going to make my case. James Comey, very much the antithesis of the Robert Mueller you described. Robert Mueller, loathed to comment on anything in public. James Comey seemingly having no problem engaging in the public spotlight and speaking out. What impact, if any, will James Comey's revelations beginning in mid-April when he begins his book tour have, do you think, on the direction of this investigation?
Boy, I see two different people. Comey, I think, has gotten way out in front in terms of commenting on his personal perspective and on what he saw beyond what he found and what the FBI found in investigations. That's something, frankly, that makes people like me uncomfortable. I don't think what he says will have any impact on the investigation because I guarantee you he's already been interviewed by former Director Mueller, and he's already turned over documents related to his conversations with the president. I think the impact will be more on public perception of the president. But that said, there's 35-40% of the American people who will believe whatever the president says, regardless of James Comey. So I'm not sure, beyond selling books, what impact he's going to have. Certainly it's not on the investigation.
Philip, I'm going to let you go. I know you've got to get on CNN. Folks, by the way, if you can't get enough of Phil Mudd, I certainly can't. Just turn on the TV in the background. He's about to go on CNN, I guess with Wolf Blitzer. He's got the Situation Room coming up. Philip, I'm going to ask you the last question, though. I'm an American citizen like you are, and I believe that the most important question American patriots in this country can be asking themselves today is, if Robert Mueller, your former boss, your friend, is fired from his role as special counsel, what are Americans supposed to do? What is their plan of action if that were to happen? And I ask you, Philip Mudd, you who knows how Washington works, you see the impact of what populations can have. What do you think is the most effective thing the American public can do if indeed the special counsel is taken out and orchestrated firing by the president?
Vote. Most significant thing I could tell you. If you don't believe in the system as it works now, vote. I will tell you that there are two elements I will be watching as a former and sort of current professional. The first is what happens at the Department of Justice and FBI. If the president fires or attempts to fire Special Counsel Mueller, FBI leadership are going to be under pressure to leave. The Department of Justice leadership will be under pressure to leave. I think that will isolate the president by making him look more and more sort of out of touch with how this investigation should proceed. The second and more significant question, that's going to put the Congress, particularly congressional Republicans, in a position where they have to say no. So before people say, I'm going to get really excited, I'm going to overact, I'd say watch what happens in the executive branch, watch what happens at the FBI and DOJ, and more significantly, watch what congressional Republicans do, because they will not sit down and accept that. That's not a partisan statement. They just can't accept that.
I lied about the last question. I promise this is the last one.
Go ahead.
Will Robert Mueller still be leading the investigation 2 months from now, Phil Mudd?
Boy, I would, if I'm banking in Vegas, I'm saying yes, but I'm also saying I know the guy, he did not like to sit around. The guy did not have, he's not interested in turning over rocks just because they're interesting. He's interested in saying, what are the facts and how quickly do I proceed with this investigation, because I got other stuff to do in life. I guarantee he doesn't want to do this for life.
Well,
I would say at some point in the next 4 to 6 months, this investigation will shut down because Robert Mueller says, I found everything I need to find. Either there's indictments or they're not. Yes, he will be, but that's going to be, in my judgment, near the tail end of his investigation because it's the end of the facts.
Wow. Listen, folks, I'm not saying he speaks to Mueller on an everyday basis, but if there's somebody that knows the thinking of the special counsel, it's the man we're talking to, Philip Mudd, who you can catch right now in mere moments on CNN. Let me go let him get in the announcer's chair. Philip Mudd, thanks as always, sir.
All right. Well, first, though, I got to get makeup, so I'll be on in a few minutes. I got to look fresh.
Go get your makeup.
I'll see you.
All right. Take it easy.
Bye-bye.
Folks, got to take a quick break, but when we come back, I'm going to ask you all the question I asked yesterday. Give us a call right now at 561-270-3844. I asked it to Malcolm Nance. I asked it to Philip Mudd. Now I'm asking you. If the special counsel is fired, what is your plan of action? There is no more urgent question in America today, folks. And now with the naming of John Bolton as the National Security Advisor, you see the possibility raised of Jeff Sessions being let go. I think that's what they're going to do. And the question is, what are you going to do if that happens? 561-270-3844 as Fernand Amandi, yours truly, continues taking you into the weekend. And the beautiful thing is when we're off the air, you know what that means, Scotty Mendick? Happy hour. So some of you right now, I know somebody somewhere saying, all right, it's a happy hour started for me a few minutes ago. All right, folks. I'll be back with more on Randi Rhodes.
To speak to Randi, call now, you bastards. 561-270-3844.
Hello.
The Randi Rhodes Air Force.
Herky Jerky has a screaming case of March Madness, so let the games begin. Try Herky Jerky's delicious game jerky and meat sticks. All Herky Jerky staples for more than 25 years. They're talking about their famous buffalo, elk, and venison, which contains less fat and carbs than beef. And because theirs are farm-raised and grass-fed, they don't have that woodsy taste like some of the other kinds. If you've never had buffalo, elk, or venison meat, it's time to give it a try. They're healthy, they are tasty, and this month, all of the game jerky packs are $5 off. The venison sticks come in hot and mild, and they were once voted best in the country at a major food show on the West Coast, and from that point on, it's been their best-selling item. Whether you're already a fan of game meat or have never tried it, now's the time to take advantage of the savings. $5 off all month long and free shipping with 2 packs or more of anything in the store, including the beef, the bacon, and the turkey, too. No promo code needed. Just try some today. Go to herkyjerky.com.
I'm David Pakman, host of The David Pakman Show on the Progressive Voices channel. Check out this clip from my show.
We've reported so many times to you that Congress will not allow the government to study gun violence. It makes no sense. It's horrible. We should be studying it closely since it's such a huge issue in American society. And Democrats and Republicans appear to have come to terms on a bill which would, as a sort of side effect of what the bill really does, allow some government study of gun violence. And it would be the CDC that would actually do the studying. And there's been language for decades that has de facto prevented the CDC from looking into the issue. And it's important to understand that the CDC was not, contrary to some talking points that you hear, the CDC was not strictly speaking banned from researching gun violence, but they were banned from using any federal funds for that research. And where the line is, money being fungible and homogenous, it has basically resulted in the CDC saying, we're not going to get involved in that. What we're now seeing is that Congress is dealing with a $1.3 trillion spending bill. They've got to pass it by Friday to avoid a government shutdown. It's not going to really do anything about gun safety laws, but it has 2 items in it that would allow research into gun violence more easily, and it would also increase background checks just slightly, which is a good thing, okay? Democrats are considering this a major win, and I hope that that's what it will be. And the thing about researching issues, research is a double-edged sword, right? If you research very polarized and political issues, you have to be willing to accept the research if it's done fairly and fully, right? Assuming it's not bogus research. And you've got to be ready to act on the results of that research. And sometimes we support research with the expectation that it's going to give us one result. Then it comes back and it gives us a different result. And an important tenet of sort of the scientific method, skepticism, all of that stuff that we talk about is if the data conflicts with your pre-existing beliefs, you've got to revise your beliefs. And of course, this assumes that the data is accurate and that the research was done properly. If I were presented with information, people in the audience know my views on guns. If I were presented with information that truly indicated, it was good research, indicated beyond the shadow of a doubt, that gun violence is merely a problem of not enough guns. Give people more guns, we're going to solve the problem. I'd reconsider and revise my beliefs. Pat, are you ideologically open to changing your view about guns if the data tells us, hey, you know what, they're right. Arming teachers, no more gun-free zones, let's do it all. I am ideologically open to that if that's where good data points.
I think it would take more than one study, though, especially because we can compare the rates of other countries to ours. So it wouldn't just be that one piece of research, but I'm open to changing my beliefs.
If the consensus of well-done research pointed in one direction, I think that there are lots of people that, generally speaking, want more gun safety regulations that, like Pat and like me, would be willing to revise those beliefs. But along the same lines, if the gun fetishists are presented with evidence that suggests that, listen, the best way forward is you got to reduce access to certain types of guns, reduce availability, you need stronger background checks, you need whatever, right? A gun registry. I'm just making stuff up here. It's not the point. They need to be open to revising their beliefs. And the truth is, they know, or at least predict, that gun violence research is not going to help the pro-gun cause. Because if they believed that the research would help their cause, they would allow it. They would welcome it. The NRA has been blocking government research into gun violence for a very long time. Now, if you ask them, they would say it's not that we're against research, it's that we know the research that would be done would be biased and would be used as a pretext to ban guns. You got to ignore that for a moment because it's not defeasible. You can't change their mind because they would say, no, the research would be part of the problem. I don't think that they are intellectually open to revising their views, and I've made it very clear I'm super open to it. Send me your thoughts. You can also discuss this on our subreddit at davidpakman.com/REDDIT. Quick break, back after this.
You've been listening to part of The David Pakman Show on the Progressive Voices channel. For full audio and video podcasts, interviews, and more, go to davidpakman.com and check out our YouTube channel at youtube.com/The David Pakman Show.
Call in, connect. To speak to Randi, call 561-270-3844. 561-270-3844.
Mr. Mueller. Are you worried that the president is preparing to order the firing of Mueller? It sure looks that way from his tweets.
Well, as I said before, if he tried to do that, that would be the beginning of the end of his presidency because we're a rule of law nation.
Fernando Monti back, substituting for the goddess. Love saying that. The goddess. You know, I used to listen to Randi Rhodes when I was a sophomore in high school. That's the kind of dork I was. I used to sneak in a little transistor radio into my high school class. And it was just like must listen, like I couldn't pull away because it happened during the day. I wonder if there's any members of the Air Force that goes back as long as I go back. This was in the, I'm calling you out, Air Force members.
I'll tell you, Fernando, I got a similar story. I was delivering pizza back when she was on the radio, so I was in my car a lot of the time. I'd leave the parking lot with sports or hip hop, and as soon as I got outside of earshot of my pizza place, it's Randi. And I didn't understand half of what she was talking about, but she was so polarizing and so opinionated and so dynamic. I loved her.
Well, you know, I learned a secret yesterday from Scotty Mendick. I didn't realize this about Randi. Can we tell him on air, Scotty, or should we keep that one to ourselves? Yeah? Well, you know, what's the highest rated show on cable television right now? Can I tell him this or no? Should just keep this one to ourselves? It's Friday. The highest rated cable show on television is the Rachel Maddow show. Scotty's giving me the no. He's giving me the death. He's giving me like the gif. What's the gif from Jonah Hill where he's like putting his hand across his neck? He's like, no, don't go there. Should I tell him, Scotty? Should we keep that one for later? Scotty's like, all right. Blame Scotty. Don't blame me, folks. I'm not trying to tease you, but there's a great Randi story behind that somewhere. Anyway, Fernando Monti back guest hosting. You can check me out on thestrangeDaysPodcast.com. Nancy's going to kill me if I don't do that, Scotty, so I got to make sure for Nancy I don't forget to say that. So, yes, thestrangeDaysPodcast.com. Go right now. Subscribe. We put it out every single week. This week, by the way, you know, we spoke to Stephen Lee Myers from the New York Times. Scotty, remember him? He was the Moscow bureau chief, wrote the definitive book on Vladimir Putin, The Rise of the New Tsar, Inside the Mind and Reign of Vladimir Putin. Definitely one you want to check out. But, folks, I did ask the question before we went to break, what is your plan of action if Bob Mueller is fired? And that is the question I want answers to. Let's kick it off with my man Tony in Fort Worth, Texas.
Hi, thanks for taking my call.
Yes, sir.
I think what would be a good idea, because to answer your question first and foremost, my plan is to take off from work. I'm an over-the-road truck driver, so I really do not have many progressive friends in this business. But what we need to do, we need to take off from work if this actually goes through. We need to use social media to our advantage, and we need to organize. We need to organize somewhat like an Occupy demonstration, but we need to do it peacefully. We need to go to our state capitals. We need to go to our city halls. We need to go to our party headquarters. We need to go to the offices of our representatives. And we need to loudly bang the drum as quietly, as peacefully as we can. Let them know, okay, We're mad as hell. We're not going to take
Tony,
this
let me
anymore.
ask you this. You heard Malcolm Nance. Did you hear the beginning of the show? We had Malcolm Nance on.
No, I didn't get the chance to hear from the beginning.
Well, one of the things that Malcolm said, and one of the things I was preaching yesterday is, we need to think about this. Not just you're going to take the day off from work, which is admirable, by the way. That's definitely what we need to be thinking about as a first step. But if Bob Mueller is fired, if the American people are not prepared to undergo their form of sacrifice for country, and that sacrifice might mean literally peacefully staying outside on the streets for days, if not weeks. It might even take, God forbid, months to do so.
However long.
This is the moment. Would you not agree? This is the moment that we have to physically make the case, and with our physical protest, show this administration and this Congress that we cannot withstand the rule of law being undermined. Because my feeling, Tony, is if we don't do this around the Mueller firing, it's over. Don't call it the United States of America anymore. It's a coup d'etat. It's the United States of Trump.
I agree.
Thanks for the phone call, Tony. Appreciate you weighing in. Let's go to Jennifer out in the West Coast. Jennifer, what's your plan if Bob Mueller is fired by Donald Trump?
Well, what I'm going to do is I belong to MoveOn.org, and what they've done is sent out a text message that says that if Bob Mueller is fired, then at like 2 o'clock in the afternoon, at 5 o'clock, we go down to the state capitol in Sacramento. And if it's in the evening, then you show up at the Capitol en masse at 12 o'clock. And what they will do is if you go to MoveOn.org and you put in your zip code, they will tell you where people are massing in your area. And then I'm currently out on disability, so I have the freedom to be out there every day until I have to. So fortunately for my injury, I get to do that, and I would do that.
How long are you prepared to do that, Jennifer? And more importantly, let me ask you this. Do people that you talk to, and I'm assuming you know a lot of anti-Trump folks are probably friends and family of yours, are they aware, are they thinking about these questions that I'm putting out there?
It's weird. Where I work, people look to me to be the one to be the voice, and I'm very annoyed with that because I feel like they have to come out with me instead of saying, yay, Jennifer, good for you for doing that. I'm very annoyed with that. In terms of my friends and family, immediate friends and family, we are very proactive and would go out there. So, no, I feel like it's my duty, like it would be my duty if I was in the military and I'm called up. Right. I cannot sit and watch this happen. I can't.
Thanks for the phone call, Jennifer. Let's go to Dennis in Buffalo, New York. Hey, Dennis, what's your plan if Mueller is fired? Hey, Dennis.
Is that too loud?
No, it's perfectly fine, sir.
Okay. My number one plan would be if you have stock, if you have bonds, if you have anything that you can trade back in, I want it to be the most costliest decision for Wall Street if Trump is terminates Mueller. Number two, you can always register 10 Democrats who are not, or 10 people who are not registered to vote, and get them. If you get like 6 million or 10 million people across the United States just to register people to vote or to send a postcard.
Dennis, I like that plan, but you know what? You can register them when you're out in line protesting against Mueller. The key thing is to get them out there. Get 10 people to go out there and line up in physical, peaceful protest and show that they're going to draw a line in the sand that says, no way, Donald Trump, are we going to let you get away with this. Folks, we got to take another break, but stick around because when we come back, we're going to go to our nation's capital. Big, big rally tomorrow, which kicked off out here in sunny South Florida. It is the March for Our Lives. We're going to talk to one of the congressmen who is leading that effort next.
For a commercial-free, on-demand, whenever, wherever listening experience, visit RandiRhodes.com for your personal premium podcast today.
Now, the top of the hour on the Progressive Voices channel on TuneIn presents the Green News Report.
If you had a message for Washington right now, what would it be?
We need help.
Please.
Puerto Rico still in the grip of crisis 6 months after Hurricane Maria, while new documents reveal Trump's FEMA failed to respond to calls for assistance.
We see it in bottle after bottle, and we see it in brand after brand.
Your bottled water is likely contaminated with microscopic plastic. Plus,
the world's last male northern white rhino has died.
Another charismatic species slips into extinction because of humans.
All of those stories and more straight ahead. From BradBlog.com, I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
Stand by for 6 minutes of independent green news, politics, analysis, and snarky comment.
Ivanka has been getting some heat for tweeting this picture of herself dressed like Science Barbie. Just like a real Barbie, she has no scientific credentials, and the space where her heart should be is a hollow plastic shell.
Harsh. This is your Green News Report. Okay, Desi Doyen, I've got something that will suffice today for some good news.
And we could use it.
The $1.3 trillion government-wide spending bill released late on Wednesday rejects Donald Trump's proposal to slash the EPA budget by 31%. Senior lawmakers have given the agency $8.1 billion for fiscal year 2018. That keeps the spending levels the same as it was in 2017. So it still needs to pass both houses of Congress before Friday, when the government could shut down if this doesn't pass. But this looks like good news. In addition to that $8.1 billion for the EPA in the main section of the bill, they also give $763 million in another part of the bill for various other EPA programs related to water infrastructure, cleaning up polluted Superfund sites, and so forth.
Well, that is some good news. It's nice that the EPA's budget will get a temporary reprieve.
It is. So now that I've found good news, how are you going to ruin it all for us today?
Well, Tuesday marked 6 months since Hurricane Maria made landfall in Puerto Rico as a Category 4 storm. It caused catastrophic damage and triggered the longest blackout in United States history. Yes, there is progress in the island's recovery, but blackouts are frequent and more than 100,000 residents are still without power in rural areas. Maria caused roughly $100 billion in damage to Puerto Rico, but Congress so far has approved only $23 billion in disaster assistance, and AP reports only a fraction of that has been spent in Puerto Rico. NPR reports that FEMA has denied 60% of applications to repair homes because many residents don't have documentation to prove they own them. And a new AP report now underscores the federal government's lack of preparation and its botched response. Emails and text messages released by Democratic Representative Elijah Cummings of Maryland indicate that in the week immediately after the hurricane, FEMA officials simply did not respond to desperate requests for fuel supplies from grocery stores and even Walmart, leading to the spoilage of tons of food amid a hunger crisis.
Wasn't that right around the same time that Donald Trump was giving himself an A+ for his response with FEMA to the crisis?
Yes, it is.
Imagine that.
Meanwhile, a new study finds that rivers are a significant source of plastic pollution in the ocean. Researchers have found that large storms that flood rivers end up washing tons of plastic litter out to sea. One single storm in northwestern England back in 2015 flushed nearly a metric ton of microplastic pollution into the ocean. And plastic in the rivers isn't just polluting the ocean, it's also in your bottled water. A new study finds that plastic bottled water is likely contaminated with microplastic. Researchers at the State University of New York tested more than 250 bottles across 11 brands and found that 93% of those bottled water samples contained tiny microscopic pieces of plastic. In an interview with the BBC, lead researcher Sherry Mason said much more study needs to be done on the health impacts of ingesting plastic.
These are the particles that can make their way across the gastrointestinal tract. We see it in bottle after bottle, and we see it in brand after brand.
The World Health Organization has announced it will launch a study on the effect of microplastics on public health, and some countries have begun phasing out single-use plastic to reduce plastic pollution. Finally, sad news in Kenya, where the world's last male northern white rhino has died. It marks the effective extinction of the subspecies of the iconic animals. All rhino species are being driven to extinction by humans through habitat loss and poaching. The extinction news comes just days after the Trump administration reversed a ban on importation of endangered animal body parts. And just days after Interior Secretary Ryan Zinke announced a new taxpayer-funded commission to promote big game hunting, stuffed with big game trophy hunters.
Yep, I knew you would ruin my good news.
Sorry.
For much more on all of these stories and the ones we couldn't get to today, check out our website at greennews.bradblog.com. Find us, follow us, and share us worldwide on the Facebooks and the Twitters at Green News Report. I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
And this has been your Green News Report.
Please help Progressive Voices support the Green News Report by stopping by bradblog.com/donate.
We believe that all men are created equal.
To the magnificent mosaic that is America.
From radio beacon to radio beacon.
I have a dream.
Change has come to America.
Believe me. Knock, knock. Who's there?
It's a figment of your imagination.
Randi Rhodes Show. Turn up your mind.
Congress did more yesterday than they've done in recent memory, and they did it because of these students and the movement that they've started. But if the Speaker and the Senate Majority Leader really want to honor the memories of the lives tragically lost at Stoneman Douglas and throughout our country, they will do what is necessary to stand up to the gun lobby and stand up for the families and for these kids.
That was Congressman Ted Deutsch as Fernanda Mondi continues to sub for Randi Rhodes, who is having a little vacay in Austin, Texas. She will be back on Monday afternoon. But until then, folks, we are taking a look at all that is happening throughout the United States today, and it promises to be a hugely large weekend, as our friend Mr. Sanders would say, with the March for Our Lives. Some folks are estimating it could reach into the hundreds of thousands of people descending on Washington, mostly young students from around the country, saying to the NRA and to the Republicans in Congress, enough is enough. We will not withstand again another loss of life given to the use of firearms, especially in classrooms. Never again is the mantra, and it all started here from where we're broadcasting from in sunny South Florida. We're actually going to try and go up to Washington in mere moments to speak to one of the members of Congress who was instrumental in getting this effort off the ground. But until then, we've got to go back to the phones at 561-270-3844, asking the question I've been asking all day today and all day yesterday. For me, it is bar none the most important question we can ask ourselves as patriotic Americans in the United States today. And that question is, what is your plan of action if you get the word that Special Counsel Mueller has been fired by President Trump and the rule of law as we know it in this country will be hanging by a thread? Let's go to Joe in Albuquerque. Hey, Joe, what's your plan?
Hey, good afternoon. How's it going?
All right.
Actually, I kind of feel we should be taking our protest to the news media on their doorsteps, in addition to the traditional places that we usually protest. Say, for instance, CNN in New York and Fox News and MSNBC. That way, they don't have to be chasing us. We'll take our fight to them.
Well, you know, I have no doubts, Joe, and in New York and in Los Angeles, all the media centers, wherever the crowds are, the media is going to follow. But where are you calling us today from?
Albuquerque, New Mexico.
Okay,
and actually, we're going to have 2 protests in the city.
So you're in the Southwest. You know, they're not major media headquarters there, but of course you have outlets. If it were to go down in Albuquerque, first question to you, Joe: do people around you, are they thinking about this? Are they talking about this? Are they taking it as seriously as I am imploring you to take it, or is everybody just kind of assuming they'll do something if the thing goes down?
Actually, we're pretty active here, and in the downtown area. I mean, we throughout New Mexico, the students also participated in the walkouts that were going on last week. I believe it was last week. So surprisingly, for being in a state with, much less population than where I was living through a few years ago, we're pretty active in terms of, protesting, our government in Santa Fe and also downtown Albuquerque.
Well, I'm glad to hear, Joe, that at least you guys are doing something about it. It is, in my judgment, again, the most important question. It's not just enough to think about it. You've got to have a plan of action. It's almost like hurricane prep. What do you do if Bob Mueller's fired? What is your checklist? What supplies are you going to grab? Where are you going to go? And where are you going to ride out the storm that could very well decide the future of this country? Folks, I promised you we were going to go to Washington. That is where we are going to go now and speak to what, in my judgment, is not only the class of the congressional delegation of the state of Florida. I think he's one of the finest members of Congress, and a lot of folks think instrumental in getting this March for Our Lives, this extraordinary event that's going to take place tomorrow in our nation's capital, led by the courageous students of Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School. It is the representative from Florida's 22nd District, Congressman Ted Deutsch. We welcome him to the broadcast. Congressman Deutsch, just speak to us about what tomorrow means. I mean, you've actually seen the entire process here. You actually spoke to the class of Marjorie Stoneman Douglas weeks before the tragic shooting on February 14th. You're now watching them lead a nation and a country on an issue that a lot of experts said was unsolvable.
Well, thanks, Fernand. Thanks for the nice introduction. It's great to be with you. I spoke to the Politics Club and a few other groups at Stoneman Douglas a couple weeks before the shooting, and just to give you some perspective, I was interviewed that day about this very topic, the topic of stopping all of the gun violence, by student journalist and reporter David Hogg, who is now front and center in this movement. Emma Gonzalez was, at the time, just a student interested in politics who came out that day to engage in this conversation about how we're going to change things in Washington. And then, literally just weeks later, the two of them and a group of others decided that they had had enough, that no one should have to endure what they endured, and that they were going to do everything that they could, not just to have a conversation, but to lead a movement. And that's what led to the town hall that captured the world's attention just a week after the shooting. And they're responsible for putting in place this massive march that's taking place, not just in Washington, but in hundreds of cities around the country and around the world. That's going to advance this movement, and it's going to cause the world to pay attention. And ultimately, it's going to convince members of Congress that they can either do the right thing and stand with students and those who are committed to public safety, or they can stand with the gun lobby. But if they make that decision, they're going to be out of office.
Representative Deutsch, we have a populace that prior to the Parkland students, the Stoneman Douglas students' breakthrough, was jaded. There was a sense of, if not complacency, cynicism, a sense of impotence in really being able to change the political process. Yet these students are showing us how it's done. From your vantage point as a member of Congress, if you could bottle up and have a kind of rinse and repeat formula for other members of the United States, other citizens to kind of follow suit, what is it that the students at Stoneman Douglas are doing so effectively that other Americans can mimic?
Fernand, they're real. Think about the kinds of debates that we have in this country, the kinds of discussions where either people just revert to talking points, or they go off into their corner with people who just feel the same way they do, or they approach members of Congress, members of the Senate, but they tread lightly around the issues. They don't want to offend anyone. These students are just real. They speak from the heart. They don't have talking points. They say what needs to be said, and they're not afraid. And that's what's different. They literally, this is called the March for Our Lives, because that's the way they view it. Because these students, high school students today, grew up from the time they were in kindergarten having active shooter drills. And they went through that year after year after year after year, and then they watched their classmates get slaughtered in their schools. That genuine approach, that speaking in normal ways about what's in their heart and what they've seen and how it impacted them, that's what people should do. That's how you push back against all of the muddied interests and the gun lobby. And that's what you're seeing, not just from these students, but from high school students all across the country.
You know, Congressman Deutsch, you talk about that gun lobby and these special interests. I know that you grew up in a home with your proud parents, and they pushed you to do hard and do very well in school and get good grades. How do they feel? How do your parents feel about the F grade that you got from the National Rifle Association? Is that one of the few Fs you wear proudly on your record?
Well, yeah, I'll tell you what. Sadly, my parents aren't here to see it, but I can tell you that my mom passed away just a couple of years ago, and there is nothing that made her happier than to see me stand up to the moneyed interest and stand up to the NRA. You know, I talked about this before, Fernando. I was in Tallahassee in the state Senate. I spent 2 straight years standing up for the tobacco lobby, and we beat them. And now to stand up to the NRA, proudly wear my F, and know that because of these kids, we're going to beat them and we're going to pass more legislation to keep our communities safe. Yeah, she'd be really proud. My folks would be really proud.
Well, we are all proud. I know all of Randi's listeners, and just across the country. I mean, I really believe a greater future lies ahead for you, Congressman Deutsch. I know you're doing great work in the Congress, but I think we saw the emergence of a statewide, if not national leader. Before I let you go, I have to ask you about 2 other issues. I know your attention is right now on the March on Washington, but Congressman Deutsch, you sit on both the Foreign Affairs Committee with an emphasis on the Middle East and North Africa. In fact, you're the ranking member of that committee. You could be the committee chair if the Democrats take the Congress. You're also on the Judiciary Committee. So tell us very quickly 2 issues. The naming of John Bolton as National Security Advisor. Are we on a war footing? And secondly, after that, talk to us about Mueller's investigation. Do you think there is a movement being made in real time and actuality to fire the special counsel?
Well, thanks for asking about both of those. Look, with respect to Bolton, I mean, let's remember when his name came up initially for a high-ranking position at the State Department. It wasn't people like you and me who were the only ones out there talking about what a bad idea that was. It was Condoleezza Rice and Stephen Hadley and Robert Gates and people who served in Republican administrations who knew how potentially damaging his serving in a senior position would be. Now, the idea that the president is going to have as his national security advisor, the guy that turns to talk about these issues, someone who politicized the intelligence to lead us to war in Iraq, someone who has advocated war with Iran, advocated war with North Korea, at a time when the president is openly talking about walking away from the Iran nuclear deal and pushing them toward moving toward a bomb, and at a time when the president talks about negotiating with the North Koreans and Bolton wants to go to war with them. Yeah, we should be really concerned about that. And my hope is that we will hear from others who express those same concerns just the way that I have. But and with respect to the other, I serve on the Judiciary Committee, and we had a press conference yesterday just before people started leaving town. And I made clear that this is not, when we talk about the president and his tweets and all the conversation about potentially firing Mueller, this is not a drill. This is that we are closest to a constitutional crisis than at any time since Watergate. If the president fires the special counsel without cause, and he does so by firing Rose or placing the attorney general to allow him to do it, to essentially repeat Nixon did, and we're in a constitutional crisis. We will come back to Washington. We will demand to come back to Washington. And if he does it, then all of those Republicans who have said that he shouldn't do it should join us at that moment in moving forward with immediate hearings on obstruction of justice. And obstruction of justice is an impeachable offense. That's what happened. And the country will have to dignify around that.
Congressman Deutsch, please, before you go, because this is the central question I have been asking our audience yesterday and today. The question is, what is your plan of action if the special counsel is fired? What do you suggest all Americans listening right now, Congressman Deutsch, what do you think they need to do? What must they do if the word gets out that Bob Mueller is fired? What is the most effective thing they can do to send the message that this will not be tolerated?
Well, the reason we're so concerned, Fran, is that Congress just finished. Members went off to their districts for the next 2 weeks. So if the president does this during this recess, I don't care where you are in the country or in the world. I don't care what holiday dinners, Easter, Passover, or anything else that you may have planned. Members of Congress and the Senate will need to get back to Washington, D.C. to help preserve our democracy and to stand up for our Constitution. And that's what people around the country should tell their members of Congress they should be prepared to do. Should
Americans also take physically and peacefully to the streets, Congressman Deutsch?
Oh, listen, if the president fires Mueller and their elected officials do anything other than acknowledge the constitutional crisis we will face, then you bet they should be out there in front of every one of their offices. They should be out there letting the country know that this is not, at that point, it's not a partisan issue. It's a question of whether or not you believe we live in a country where the real rule of law matters, and that is whether preserving the Constitution matters. And I know your listeners believe that it does, and if the president takes action, then I certainly would expect lots of them to get out there and let people know have to act.
Folks, it's Congressman Ted Deutsch. Do yourselves a favor. Follow him on Twitter at Rep Ted Deutsch. That's DEUTCH. Thanks so much for joining us, Con. Yes.
Thanks, Fernand. And I appreciate the plug for at Rep Ted Deutsch. But I'm also now tweeting at Ted Deutsch. It's a little more political. And
there you go. There you go, folks. At Ted Deutsch. Make sure you get it, and we'll be watching you all weekend. Thanks so much for joining us, Congressman. I know you've been really busy leading up for the March for Our Lives.
That's great to be with you, Fernand. Thanks so much.
All right, folks, we're going to take another quick break in just a minute, but don't worry. Just getting warmed up. We got a little bit more fun in the sun down here, although Scotty and Brett are ready to call it a day. They're ready to call it a week and ready to hit the bars, I think. Right, Brett? Brett, come on. I know you saw Sarah Huckabee said no to you, so you gotta drown your sorrows. It's okay, my friend.
A pint of Guinness will do me for just a little while.
And I don't know what Scotty's poison choice is. Is it still what used to be Scotty, or did Randy shake it out of you? No, I know. We can't talk about that on this broadcast. Folks, when we come back, we're going to get into a little bit of Chinese economy and what the implications of the tariff war that our treasonous un-American president has set off with another one of the best in the business. I told you I wasn't coming empty-handed. Fernand Amandi subbing in for the great Randi Rhodes. We'll be back with more next.
The Randi Rhodes Air Force. The Randi Rhodes Show is live on RandiRhodes.com and the free Progressive Voices app for Android and iOS. Visit the App Store or ProgressiveVoices.com now.
Mitchell Gold and Bob Williams introduces its Spring 2018 home collection of classic, modern, and new traditional silhouettes in a vivid spectrum of colors, textures, patterns, and prints. The new spring collection features a modern slant with clean-lined and comfortable styles that pay tribute to iconic American designs from the mid-century to the late 1970s. Experience the new collection in comfort at a signature store near you, or peruse the entire collection in e-catalog online. Find a store and shop online at mgbwhome.com. Join the Mitchell Gold and Bob Williams Comfort Club, a customer loyalty program that offers you 20% savings every day with exclusive access to special member-only offers and services like complimentary in-home design. It's free. It's easy to join. Sign up now. Start saving today at a Mitchell Gold and Bob Williams signature store near you or online at mgbwhome.com.
Whether you're listening to me, Mark Levine, each Monday and Wednesday,
or me, Leslie Marshall, each Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday,
you can hear us 3 to 4 p.m. Eastern Time on the Progressive Voices Network.
Here's a sample of what you'll hear.
We saw children who put down their cell phones and their video games and their computers, and they picked up their First Amendment constitutional right. They picked up justice. Those kids, when they turn 18, are going to make a blue tsunami in this country, showing the GOP and the NRA who really pulls the strings. It's we the people, we the voters. And it's not just protests. It's not just walkouts. You have to vote. You have to show up. You have to do the work. You have to get off your butt and vote. I couldn't be prouder of our future. Our future's in their hands. And I was just so admiring of these kids. The first student speaker at the Walkout Day rally at the U.S. Capitol, Matt Post, talks to us about young people refusing to accept that status quo on guns.
We reject turning our schools into prisons. We will accept nothing less than comprehensive gun control. And if it's what it takes, we will shame our national policymakers into protecting us. Not just in schools, but in churches, movie theaters, on the streets, and in the communities of color, which are disproportionately devastated by the sickness of gun violence. The lawmakers who fail to support us, those who look for every answer to our nation's gun problem, but the guns themselves will be complicit in every death that comes after. To every politician sitting in Congress, working behind us, you get to decide who lives. And so this is not a partisan issue for us. There's nothing cosmetic about life or death. This is about guns, and it's about our morality as a country. When the commander-in-chief solution to this country's gun problem is more guns, you know we have a moral problem in this White House. When national policymakers value the blood money of the NRA over the lives of children, you know we have a moral problem in the halls of Congress. And when this is doomed to happen again, when in the coming weeks and months, more of my peers will be slaughtered in their own classrooms, when their deaths will be dismissed as collateral, you know we have a moral problem in this country. So let's make one last thing clear. Their right to own an assault rifle does not outweigh our right to live. The adults have failed us. This is in our hands now. And if any elected official gets in our way, we will vote them out and replace them ourselves. Enough is enough. Enough is enough.
As Matt Post talked about, that this will happen again. And mark my words, it will. I'm not being irresponsible. Until we do something as a nation, until we do something as parents, until we do something as voters, until we do something and force those legislators to do something, this will happen again. Make no mistake.
Again, that's Mark Levine every Monday and Wednesday.
And Leslie Marshall each Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday.
3 to 4 p.m. Eastern Time on the Progressive Voices Network.
Hello, I'm Casey Hobbs.
And I'm Shane Mason, and we're the hosts of Nurse Talk Radio.
Here's what we're talking about this week. That music can mean only one thing. It's time for Healthcare in America with senior correspondent Donna Smith. Donna, welcome. Let's get right to it.
Thank you. Let's do it.
All right, so Pfizer, pocketing a big tax cut from Trump, ends investment in Alzheimer's and Parkinson's research. Why was this initiated? What's this all about?
Seriously, at a time when arguably they're making more money than they ever have in history, and as we've talked about before, when pharmaceutical companies are more profitable than even oil companies are in this nation. Quite honestly, what Pfizer's trying to argue, and other pharmaceuticals have, is that research and development is just too expensive for the amount of benefit that accrues from having done so. And we know that that is not reality. We know that research and development is expensive, but we also know that a lion's share of that development comes from public dollars, not from private investment. It comes from universities and colleges all over the country doing research work on medications, on disease, and so forth. So it is unconscionable that Pfizer and other pharmaceuticals make the decisions, nope, we're not going to put the money in because the margin of profit isn't what we want on this medication. So many of our baby boomers are going to face this situation either within their families or in themselves and having dementia and Alzheimer's. And here we go with the pharmaceutical companies saying, no, we don't make enough money, so we're not going to advance more profits on this.
Thanks for listening. You can find more information about these topics at nursetalksite.com or nationalnursesunited.org.
This podcast is powered by National Nurses United, the nation's largest union for registered nurses.
remember as a kid, the stereotypical things associated with girls were cooking, cleaning, fashion, interior design, anything to do with children, hair, makeup. But as an adult, I realize that the top earners in all of these professions are men. How did this happen? Well, it's one of the conversations we're going to have on my new show called She Persisted. I'm your host, Melissa Carter, and as a media personality, a lesbian, a single mom, and a patient with a chronic disease, I can tell you, I certainly have some opinions. And I know that you do too. So let's be part of each other's lives and talk these things out on She Persisted. It's at 8 a.m. on the East on the Progressive Voices Network and on demand on the Progressive Voices app. I would really love for you to be part of the show because I believe that together we can go from She Persisted to She Thrived. I hope you'll join me.
The Randi Rhodes Show is live on RandiRhodes.com and the free Progressive Voices app for Android and iOS. Visit the App Store or ProgressiveVoices.com now.
The president is not a normal client. The president is the most powerful person on the planet. This particular president has one of the strongest personalities and highest levels of self-confidence of any human being I've ever met. This president, if told not to say something that he wants to say, will probably say it anyway. And this president doesn't always use, I'm being diplomatic now, an economy of words. That recipe is a field day for prosecutors and FBI agents that would like to trip him up. Nothing good can come from Donald Trump trying to persuade Bob Mueller not to charge him with anything. Let the lawyers do the talking and the negotiating.
That was state media, the propaganda channel, Fox News. Fair and balanced. I can't even say it without laughing. It's such a joke. But let me tell you, folks, what's not a joke? Remember the Dow Jones Industrial Average, the metric by which President Trump over and over again would talk about what a great job he was doing, in spite of the fact that it was Obama's economy that he inherited. But remember over and over again, the Dow, look at the Dow. The Dow's doing great. The Dow's up. The Dow, the Dow, the Dow. Well, let me tell you where the Dow is now. Dow is down 1,100 points over the last 2 days. 1,100 points. And a lot of it has to do, as I see Phil Mudd there on CNN. Isn't that crazy how that happens, Scotty? I love how that works out. Anyway, back to the show. But the truth of the matter is the president's stunning announcements when it came to engaging in a war, a tariff war with the Chinese is having tremendous repercussions. And I'm on this theme today. My theme is I'm going to get the best minds in America that I know to talk to you about what it really means, separate the BS from the facts. And I called the only person in America I want to go to and hear from when it comes to explain, is this a real economic problem? Are the markets really this volatile? Is this the ride we're going to be in for the foreseeable? It's CNBC's Ron Insana. My man, we welcome him to the broadcast. Hey, Ron.
Hey, I take it you meant the lower 48, excluding Alaska and Hawaii.
Well, those count too. But come on, Ron Insana. Talk to me, Ron. I've been groping to speak to you and just explain it. Be the Ron whisperer. Are we freaking out with reason? Are you concerned? Because if Ron Insana is concerned, then the markets in America are concerned.
I would say I'm a little concerned, and I'm concerned on a variety of fronts. Not the least of which is the lack of strategery employed by this president when it comes to things like economic and trade negotiations, the risks that he oversteps his negotiating position when he makes these blanket claims about how bad trade is or how badly we've suffered, given that the U.S. is currently at full employment, given that our exports are near a record. We're exporting crude oil, liquefied natural gas. The U.S. economy is actually in very good shape. If you talk to manufacturers, if you talk to CEOs, we're actually doing quite well. And to the extent that the Chinese have a trade surplus with us, which is about $500 billion, and today was the first day that he got the number right in a couple of years. That represents a pretty small fraction of a $17 trillion economy. The merchandise trade deficit broadly is under 3% of GDP. So he's really ratcheting up not just the pressure on China, but what he's really doing, what has me more concerned than just the individual trade spats that he's engaged in is the notion of kind of tearing apart the entire global trading system by moving back towards bilateral agreements, one nation to another, instead of this multilateral framework that we've built over the last 70 years, in which the United States can go to the World Trade Organization and tell them, China is violating this rule and that rule. It's adjudicated. If China loses, we have the right to impose tariffs. There's a process, a dispute settlement mechanism within the World Trade Organization to use. Instead, the president goes off half-cocked on a lot of these different issues, whether it's pulling out of NAFTA, whether it's, threatening South Korea by pulling troops out if they don't agree to our trade terms, which would be catastrophic. All sorts of kind of, harebrained efforts to redress a very small economic issue. And when you couple that with the regime change, if you will, that's taking place in the White House, that raises geopolitical risk as well, I get concerned that we're at an inflection point in the economy and possibly, in a broader sense, with respect to foreign relations as well.
Ron, what do you see, though, as the safeguards? I mean, to the extent that there are any, is there a safety net within the walls of 1600 Pennsylvania, within the administration? I mean, in the past, these have been done either by the Treasury Secretary, certainly the OMB office, the Council of Economic Advisors, the Fed chair. Are any of these individuals managing to, behind the scenes, when the cameras are off, make the case to the president that these are moves that really are upending what has been a pretty remarkable economic turnaround by this country? Or has the president just been successful in filling every one of these seats with toadies, lackeys that are following in his unhinged vision for the economic future of this country?
Well, I would say that with specific respect to trade, Peter Navarro, who's the president's top trade advisor, and Robert Lighthizer, who's the U.S. trade representative, tend to, let's say, not reinforce his better angels on trade. Peter Navarro, from my perspective, is one of the worst economists I've encountered in my career, and he's got these really crazy ideas about how to implement trade practices that are really, again, going against the grain of what we've established over the course of the last 60, 70 years, which, by the way, is also tied into the way in which we deal with our geopolitical allies, our NATO allies, countries like Japan and others. It's not just our trade adversaries, but guys like Peter Navarro really have a radical view of global trade. They tend to be more isolationist. They tend to be more nationalistic. They think that a closed economy is probably a better option for the U.S. And I think they really misapprehend what's transpired on the global stage in the last, several decades. And so, no, I don't think with Larry Kudlow's move into the White House, my good friend and former
your colleague. I was going to say your colleague, Larry Kudlow.
Look, I think Larry's much more in line with traditional thinking when it comes to trade. However, he's not going to make his disputes public. He won't necessarily step out of line, I don't think. And he's made that point that once the president makes a decision, it's his job to sell it, not to argue with him publicly. So we'll see whether or not he can offset a Peter Navarro or some of the other folks whispering in the president's ear who like this idea of economic nationalism.
Ron and Santa, let's say you're about 58, 59, 60 years old, and you've got...
How about turning 57 in a week and a half?
Well, so then you're in the cohort that I'm talking about, and retirement used to be a word. Now you're kind of seeing it off there in the horizon. It's getting a little bit closer, and yet you've got all of this economic instability. Perhaps it may be some turbulence short term, it may be long term. What are you advising people that are coming close to the R word? Given what we're seeing, the president potentially setting off a trade war, now the war drums being beaten where we may actually find ourselves in multiple conflicts around the globe. If you're someone that's counting on that 401k, you're counting on your retirement savings, what are you thinking right now, Ron and Santa?
Well, remember that if you're 57, as I'm about to be, you're 10 years away from retirement because the official retirement age for somebody at the tail end of the baby boom is 67, not 65. You could still go ahead and take early retirement at 62 or grab your Social Security anywhere along the way, but your official retirement age for full Social Security benefits is 67. Now, what I would recommend, and this is for a variety of reasons, I mean, all other things being equal, I wouldn't retire at 67 if I didn't have to. There are a lot of benefits to staying in the workforce, whether it's full-time or part-time, beyond what is now really kind of an artificial retirement age. I mean, life expectancy has extended. It's been shown that people stay more mentally engaged if you're in the workforce longer. And if you do extend that period, you don't have to worry really about some of these intermediate term risks, both to the economy and the stock market. It's rare that a 10-year period doesn't deliver returns in your portfolio that will be higher 10 years from now than they are today.
But it's wrong. Is that
absent a nuclear war?
I was going to say, is that absent the norm, social precedent breaking presidency of Donald Trump, the likes of which this instability we've never seen before? Don't you got to throw out the rules here, if you will?
Yeah, I mean, and look, this is the thing. In 34 years of being a full-time or part-time business journalist, and having some other roles in the financial marketplace, I've never been this uncomfortable. I mean, take 9/11 aside, which was its own, very severe, profound event. I have not witnessed this type of instability in the country. I've not, as a journalist, been this unsettled watching the news on a day-to-day basis that no longer has a cycle. It's really the president's, whim that drives the news cycle. And yeah, I mean, I would disagree with anybody who thinks that he is a three-dimensional strategic thinker. I think this is a lot more like checkers and then distracting people from the board while you make fake kingers at the other end. I just don't think that, that the normal rules apply. Having said that, I also don't think he's going to be president forever. And so, since we know that there is a finite point, and should there be a change in the composition of Congress in November, there will be, considerable limits on what he can do. So you have to take that into account. And if you have a 10-year horizon, as we do, it's not time to panic. I would say in the short term, if you've got big gains and you want to take some chips off the table and shepherd some cash for a better buying opportunity down the road, that might be a wise idea outside the confines of a tax-deferred account, because you want to be a little careful with how you deal with that. And if you're trading, there's going to be a lot of opportunities to pick up stocks pretty cheap, and there already are. Facebook is selling at something like 16 times earnings. They do have a wide variety of problems at the moment. But, Apple and McDonald's have come down, and some other stocks, look very interesting here because we've seen such a fairly steep correction since early February. We're retesting the February lows, all those types of things. I mean, if you have actually a disciplined plan where you're putting the same amount of money in every month and you're buying high and low, your dollar cost averaging, as they like to say on Wall Street, that leaves you less vulnerable to shocks. There will be a point at which it might be best to be out of the market. I don't think we're quite there yet. But if we have another week like this, and if we have another behavioral week from the president that's as kind of unspooled as it's been, I think, maybe you want to back away a bit. Listen, we've got the tough news weekend coming up. The president's going to get hit with a couple of things over the weekend. And so I think that we don't know how he responds to that. We don't know whether General Kelly stays as chief of staff. We don't know. We assume General Mattis will stay defense secretary as kind of the last
sane person, you mean? Is that the...
Well, no, I don't want to go that far. Because
I will. I'll go that far, Ron and Santa. The last man.
Sane, but,
with his
at least the last
marbles going there.
Standing, But look, I think we're entering a challenging period, and the market's now starting to reflect a shift in the balance of risk. Tax reform and deregulation was no doubt very good for corporations and for stock prices. Now we're talking about trade wars. We're talking about actual wars. We're talking about John Bolton wanting, as he said in the past, potentially to rip up the Iran deal. That's why oil prices have been rallying so sharply of late. You've got the Saudis and the Iranians possibly preparing for some sort of proxy war somewhere in the Middle East with our blessing, with the blessing of Israel. Those types of things are starting to come around. And then you've got the wild card of North Korea. So, they say the market climbs the wall of worry. I just think there are, at the moment, too many bricks in the wall to climb it successfully.
Well, speaking of bricks in the wall, let me go to candles on the cake. You said you're going to turn 57 in just, a couple weeks, Ron and Santa?
Let me see, 8 days.
8 days. Well, let me be the first to wish you happy birthday. Another one of your contemporaries who's going to turn 57 in just a few months. In fact, I think this is the must-see one-on-one. If there is a get in your line of work,
I wish I were still doing interviews because I would love to sit down with President Obama.
No, forget. Yeah. No, I didn't mean President Obama. Well, he won't be 58. Will he be 58? Is he that old?
He'll be 57. He'll be 57. He's, I think, August 4th or about there. He is. It's the first time in my life that I was ever older than a sitting president.
Oh, my goodness gracious. No, I actually had somebody else in mind, and I think you got to get CNBC to spring for this one because you want to talk about must-see television. Forget Frost Nixon. I want to see Insana Gary Cohn, the president's former economic advisor. who has now stepped out. Ron, when are you going to score that one? That's the one America wants to see.
I wish I did interviews still. As a contributor, that's not my bailiwick anymore. I doubt. I was pretty vocal about, and both in print and on CNBC, about opposing Gary Cohn being appointed to head the Fed. So I doubt he would sit down with me. But I didn't think that he necessarily had the background for becoming the chair of the Federal Reserve.
So here's the better
very
question.
Talented, very smart guy.
Are we better off or worse off that he's not in that position anymore from your perspective?
Well, listen, I think Jay Powell's a responsible guy. I also think there's a regime change at the Fed that's underway. I mean, Jay Powell himself is more of a banker and not an academic economist, as was Janet Yellen, Ben Bernanke, Alan Greenspan, Paul Volcker. And so we've seen a break in the style of Fed chair. And if you happen to watch any of the Fed's news conference on Wednesday, decidedly different tone to the news conference, much more plain-spoken, much more direct. Certainly for most people, easier to understand what the Fed's trying to do. Having said that, the composition of the Fed's changing dramatically, and we're going to have to, take stock of what's happening there too. Are they going to continue on with a program that thus far has done the economy a great deal of good? Will they panic if they see inflation accelerate and raise rates too much? Will they panic if they see the stock market fall and stop dead in their tracks with their attempt to normalize interest rates? There are a lot of open questions as to how the Fed's going to respond to various inputs that they get, trade wars, the growing budget deficit, which we haven't even talked about yet, which is a much bigger deal than the trade deficit. We're going to borrow $1 trillion this year.
Jesus.
And China today, at least obliquely, threatened to stop buying U.S. Treasuries. Now they're about the second or third largest holder of
no biggie, Ron, right?
Yeah, I mean it's a self-defeating process. On the one hand, if because if they tank that economy, the exports also tank. Having said that, if you get to a point where China has a much longer-term view of their economic prospects and decide to really up the ante and start selling U.S. Treasury bonds, that could create some real chaos, not only in the markets but in the economy, and it's going to get down to Trump against Xi, and really who blinks first in this trade battle, and it has implications for broader stuff, broader trade relations.
I'm a patriot first and foremost. I don't know if I'd put my money on Donald Trump, on the American president against the Chinese president.
Well, she's president for life.
That's exactly right.
I mean, so that's a whole different ball of wax. Now, I think the president may covet that position, but he ain't going to get it. And hopefully, the president, first of all, has a wide latitude on trade. That's been given to presidents for several decades.
Yeah, exactly,
now,
for decades. Yes.
Yeah, hopefully Congress will step up on this because their constituents are going to be hit. When he decided to impose, although he's rolled these back to a certain extent, the aluminum and steel tariffs, the Europeans came out immediately and decided to hit or threatened to hit Kentucky bourbon, products from Wisconsin and products from California, where the congressional leadership resides, and do harm in their districts. I mean, so everybody's smart enough to know how this stuff works. If they start pressuring Congress people as opposed to the president, there'll be a groundswell against the president's policies. And so this can get dicey. This is not the easiest stuff in the world. And it does, when you get into these beggar thy neighbor policies, as was the case in the 1930s, it exacerbated the depths of what was at the time a Great Recession and turned it into a Great Depression. And I'm not saying that's what's going to happen, but it's a very risky game to play, and you really have to have an end game outlined, and I'm not sure that they do. I think they're really throwing this stuff up against the wall just to see if it sticks.
The only silver lining about what you're telling me, Ron and Santa, is that happy hour starts in about 15 minutes because
yes, it does.
I need to, after what you've told us here on the Randy Rhodes Show, I'm going to have to step up to the bar.
I'm not apocalyptic by any stretch of the imagination.
I know you're not.
But I am worried that look, we have a sufficient amount of chaos, and that's an overused word, in the White House. We have, I think, an insufficient amount of intellectual capital in the White House right now. And I really don't see, and listen, I might be wrong. I mean, he might be a chess player and not a checkers player, but it's certainly not the way it appears to me and a lot of other people that I talk to. And I just think there are, multiple risks right now that because of his, I think, inability to take on the mantle of the job and perform it in ways that are, I think, less threatening to both our allies and our adversaries, there's room for a mistake. And that's the part that worries me most.
He is, in my judgment, the reason to tune into CNBC. He's the must-see TV on CNBC. It's Ron and Santa. You can follow him on Twitter at RNSanta. Thank you so much for joining us, Ron. On
Hey,
the
thanks
Randi
for
Rhodes
having
Show.
me. I really appreciate it.
As always, have a great weekend. Folks, that's it. It's time for the last segment next as my guest hosting duties come in for a close and come in for a landing. I want to hear from you, the Randi Rhodes Air Force, at 561-270-3844. Want to try and get as many calls as possible, so rapid fire. Here's the 2 questions I want you to tell me. First, the question of the last 2 days. What do you plan to do if Bob Mueller is fired? And second, are you going to go protest tomorrow at the March for Our Lives? If you are, I want to know well. Last segment, last call with yours truly, Fernando Mondi, filling in for Randi Rhodes.
Wake up!
To speak to Randi, call now, you bastards. 561-270-3844.
Hello.
The Randi Rhodes Air Force.
Herky Jerky has a screaming case of March Madness, so let the games begin. Try Herky Jerky's delicious game jerky and meat sticks. All Herky Jerky staples for more than 25 years. They're talking about their famous buffalo, elk, and venison, which contains less fat and carbs than beef. And because theirs are farm-raised and grass-fed, they don't have that woodsy taste like some of the other kinds. If you've never had buffalo, elk, or venison meat, it's time to give it a try. They are healthy, they are tasty, and this month, all of the game jerky packs are $5 off. The venison sticks come in hot and mild, and they were once voted best in the country at a major food show on the West Coast, and from that point on, it's been their best-selling item. Whether you're already a fan of game meat or have never tried it, now's the time to take advantage of the savings. $5 off all month long and free shipping with 2 packs or more of anything in the store, including the beef, the bacon, and the turkey, too. No promo code needed. Just try some today. Go to herkyjerky.com.
Hello, I'm Casey Hobbs.
And I'm Shane Mason, and we're the hosts of Nurse Talk Radio.
Here's what we're talking about this week. In a nearly unanimous vote, Kaiser RNs and MPs in California voted to authorize the California Nurses Association bargaining team to call a strike if needed to achieve a fair contract that provides safe staffing and demonstrates respect for nurses' contributions to Kaiser.
With 99% voting yes to authorize a strike, RNs and NPs have sent Kaiser a clear message that there's overwhelming support for the CNA bargaining team's demands and that nurses are ready to strike if needed to make sure patients get safe care.
We just heard that there has been a tentative agreement, and here with us to talk about it is RN and co-president of National Nurses United, Deborah Berger.
It's really exciting news.
Yeah, congratulations. This is great. So first off, how does this contract improve patient care?
Well, we got several staffing enhancements that address nurses' concerns about their ability to provide safe care to their patients. We've won 150 full-time equivalents of campus support nurse positions, so that will allow nurses to deal with emerging situations that do require extra staff, but often we don't have enough available immediately. So that was key. And then Kaiser's going from an acuity system where the nurses have already in the contract a number of protections for making sure that the system is transparent and will be able to better advocate for improved patient care within the system.
Thanks for listening. You can find more information about these topics at nursetalksite.com or nationalnursesunited.org.
This podcast is powered by National Nurses United, the nation's largest union for registered nurses.
This is the Randi Rhodes Show. To speak with Randi, dial 561-270-3844. That's 561-270-3844.
It's Friday, you bastard.
Fernando Mondi back on News Radio 610 WIOD. Don't give me the toys. I feel like I'm a kid in the candy store again.
Absolutely correct, sir.
That's what I always say, right? When it comes right down to it, what is the Amandi Credo? Scotty and I developed this when I was on the airwaves of News Radio 610 WIOD. It was a very simple three-pronged solution. And my feeling in life, this was taught to me in college. I will never forget when my professor said, hey, if you want to figure out anything that's going on, you just got to do this.
Just follow the money.
So Scotty and I tried to improve upon that a little bit because we learned in the somnambulant state that America keeps finding itself in, there's 2 steps that you got to do before you just
follow the money.
First, you got to do this. Wake up! You got to wake up and recognize. I don't mean wake up from your sleep. We all do that every morning. I'm talking about wake up to what's going on around you. This is something that Randi is a big preacher on. After you wake up, you got to
wake up! Get smart. And then just follow the money.
Randi teaches us you first, yes, got to wake up, but then you got to get smart. You got to get the information. You got to find out what's going on. And once you're possessed and you have that information, then you can
just follow the money.
And that helps you start asking questions like this.
What did the president know? And when did he know it?
You've got Russia.
You've got Russia. That's what we know. That's where this thing comes back to. Anyway, folks, we're coming in for a landing here. I want to get as many calls as we can. My question of the day, I opened the show yesterday and again today asking it because I think it is, bar none, the most important question any patriotic American who loves this country like I do, like I know you do, should be asking themselves. And the question is, what is your plan of action specifically if Special Counsel Mueller is fired? You heard what members of Congress said. Congressman Deutsch said we will be in constitutional crisis. It is that serious. Malcolm Nance, you heard what he said. You got to get out there with a plan. Waiting until the last minute does you no good. You got to know what to do and where to do it quickly. Let's see what Jim's plan is. Jim in Ohio, talk to me.
Hey, I live in lovely, the 8th District, John Boner's old district. There's down the road from me, there's a lot of Trump crap all over the place in this town. But there is a guy that has this beautiful flag post in his front yard and this beautiful American flag flying from it. But underneath it has this nice blue effing Trump flag on it. So if they do that, now I'm going to tell you, I'm 64. I got rheumatoid arthritis, emphysema, and I just had stents and angioplasty done. I'm going to sneak down there at night and turn his goddamn flags upside down.
Well, listen, just make sure you don't get arrested or shot. Here in Florida, Jim, we've got something called Stand Your Ground, and I'm not even joking about that. Guys, am I joking? Brett, am I joking about Stand Your Ground?
No, Fernandez, you know I'm a minority, and I know damn well you are not joking about Stand Your Ground.
Scotty, am I joking about Stand Your Ground? They don't call this the Gunshine State for nothing, so you be careful out there in the Buckeye State, Jim. Thanks for the phone call. Have a great weekend. Let's go to Tony in Georgia. Got Georgia on my mind. What are you going to do, Tony?
First of all, super job, buddy. Enjoyed your 2 shows. I don't mean to downshift on you, but I live in the 14th District of Georgia, which is up in the northwest corner in the mountains. And I'm going to tell you straight up, I would be afraid to get out because I would be scared shitless some Trump supporters would shoot me. We are guns everywhere. You think Florida is a gun-shy state. We have guns everywhere, anywhere, all the way. And I would really be afraid to get out and protest like impeach Trump. I would be afraid I would get shot. And that's the truth. That's how bad it is.
I got to tell you, somebody might say, oh, come on, strap on a pair, Tony. I think Tony is absolutely right on the money. And that is why it is because of the point that Tony just raised that I think you got to start thinking about it. And that's why there's safety in numbers. You got to pick a public space where you are going to be safe, where you can do this peacefully, where the eyes of the world bring your cameras with you. Folks, you better be doing Facebook Live. You better be doing Periscope. There's so many things that you can do. But if there's one thing you remember from these 2 days that I've been with you, besides this one, yeah, of course, besides waking up, please do what I say. Don't do what I say. Do what Malcolm Nance says. Do what Dave Jolly says. Do what Philip Mudd says. Come up with your plan, because if it happens, it could very well be the moment in American history that we have the right and the opportunity to save this republic, because it's bad enough that he's still there. He shouldn't be there, but he is. I want to thank Brett and Scotty for doing just phenomenal work.
You did a great job, Fernand.
I appreciate that. Not as good as the goddess, but you know what? I tried. Folks, thanks for indulging me. We'll do it again soon. And don't forget to...
Get smart. And then... just follow the money.
Buy a Stinking Podcast. Go to RandyRhodes.com for the whole thing and a podcast. Buy a Stinking Podcast.